Okay, hello everyone. I think we're good to go. Hello, I'm Alex Carter. I am Academic Director for Philosophy at Professional and Continuing Education here at the University of Cambridge. And I'm joined today by one of our students who has been with us for a while, Dan Peltz. Would you like to introduce yourself, Dan?
Sure. Thank you, Alex. This is a first for me, but as you say, I've been with PACE since it was ICE, and the good thing that there was a change of name. I've started slowly with undergraduate philosophy courses, and then, to my good luck, I managed to get into the postgraduate philosophy course. This is not part philosophy, I mean, is not part of my main activity. My day job is at an intergovernmental organization, but definitely philosophy has been a lifelong passion for me. That's about it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dan. And absolutely, we'll come to you later for your insights into what it's like to be a student at Pace as well. Um, so I'm going to briefly introduce the course and talk a little bit about the course. We've made quite a bit of information available on the website as well, and I think I've already seen from some of the questions that people have engaged with some of the videos that we've made in the past about the course. And it is a very similar course to what's been delivered before. So if you've seen anything online, very much this is what the course is offering. But I will do a brief overview for those who haven't seen any information already. So the Postgraduate Certificate in Philosophy is a master's level course. It is not a full degree. An MST and a Master of Studies is a full degree, but a postgraduate certificate is a part-time single-year qualification that enables you to study at master's level. Quite a few people treat it as either an opportunity to engage in much deeper conversations about philosophy. They've just enjoyed philosophy in the past. They have plenty of qualifications and they're not necessarily seeking more qualifications. They just want an opportunity to delve into philosophy more deeply. Other people will treat it as a conversion course. So they might have done a history degree. And I know that some of the questions relate to this, how much philosophy experience do I have to have in the past? And the answer is not necessarily formal philosophical training. You don't have to have done a degree in philosophy specifically to do the postgraduate certificate in philosophy. As Dan was saying, his background is not in philosophy. And many of our students have backgrounds in finance, in social services, in social sciences, in humanities, in the arts, etc. So we welcome all comers, basically. And the idea is that you will ideally have had a degree, or you will have something that will enable us to have confidence that you would be able to hit the ground running, as it were, because it is master's level and you are writing assignments quite quickly. I think Dan can attest to this. We'll come back to this, I suspect, a little bit later. The pace of the submissions increases in the postgraduate courses. So if you're used to our undergraduate courses, for instance, you would submit your assignments at the end of the term. For the postgraduate certificate, you have teaching weekends where you come in person, which is also different from our undergraduate courses. You come in person to Madingley Hall or to another venue if we're teaching at a different venue. But to date, we've only taught at Madingley Hall. And you will receive tuition in the units, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. And then you'll submit an extended essay, about 3,000 words, on a topic that we've set, a question that we've set for you. What then happens is, in the second part of the term, you're able to take any idea that you've been interested in during that course, during the unit so far, and apply it to a contemporary problem. What do I mean by a contemporary problem? Probably whatever you are imagining a contemporary problem to be. So it could be politics, it could be post-truth politics, it could be AI, it could be environmentalism, it could be modern slavery, it could be all sorts of different problems that we're facing as a planet, as a species, and we're applying philosophy to try and address those problems, even if it's just to understand the problem better. So the idea is that you can exercise your own interests. You can take philosophy and you can apply it to something that you're personally interested in. I hope Dan won't mind me saying, but one of his interests working in patent and intellectual property areas has been the philosophy of intellectual property. Does it exist? What is it, etc. Dan, did you want to comment on that?
I would add to that it is indeed rewarding to be able to bring experience. And I understand that some of the potential students for this course have qualms about how to combine and what value does their previous experience bring to this endeavor. And I can assure everyone that the course is flexible enough to allow that to happen. And as you have just mentioned, Dr. Carter, it is mainly in the second essay of each term, which, by the way, is a shorter one. And then, yeah, it's roughly 1,500 words. And then also that allows to bring in some personal interests or some background, as it were. Yes, thank you.
No, great. Thank you, Dan. Yeah, absolutely. And this is something we experience in adult learning generally. We're dealing with people who've had, they might be at the end of their career, they might be mid-career, they might have studied in disciplines that I know much less than them about. So for instance, they might be experts in physics and I'm certainly not, or they might be experts in computer science and might have a very different view of artificial intelligence for that reason. And what I learn all the time as well. I remember we were having our Kant teaching weekend recently, and I was being schooled on the law because I said, is it not telling the truth in court to say, I'd rather not tell you, or I don't want to tell you? Because that is technically, that might be true. And the lawyers in the group were very much, no, that would not be considered acceptable in a law court, that would be considered the same as lying. So again, you can sort of test out hypotheses, you can work with each other, and it's a lovely environment to do that in. With everyone with so many different experiences, everyone's got something to contribute and everyone's got something to learn, including the tutors who also thoroughly enjoy the course. And I should mention them specifically as well. So we have in our first unit Johannes Wagner, who delivers the teaching on ancient Hellenistic philosophy, but he also brings in Eastern philosophy as well to look for parallels between Eastern and Western philosophy. So looking at comparative philosophy in that respect. But it's mainly also looking then at the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle and Seneca and Cicero. So there's a lot to cover, but you can be selective and you can move around in that material as you see fit. The second unit is taught by Dr. Cecilia Muratori, who is based at the University of Pavia in Italy, a wonderful university, which I visited for the first time. And I found out that there are universities in Italy where there are colleges. It's a university with 15 colleges set up in the 16th century. So it's not too dissimilar from Cambridge in that respect. But Cecilia has been teaching at Pace for a number of years, and she delivers the Kant unit. And for that one, rather than looking at Kant as a whole, she looks very specifically at one text which Kant wrote very late in his career, which is called "On a recent tone of superiority in philosophy," where he's targeting a certain group of philosophers who think they know it all. And Kant, of course, not being a know-it-all at all himself, of course he was, challenges them on this and says, no, you have to put in the hard work. So it's very much a paper about the nature of philosophy itself, which I think is fascinating. But because it comes at the end of his career, you do also get to dip into how did he get to that point and what did the other critiques that he wrote deal with. In the third unit, Dr. Dan Watts from the University of Essex, where I did my PhD, comes to talk about existential philosophy and specifically the Christian existentialism of Søren Kierkegaard. And Kierkegaard is a challenging topic for many, but it's such a rewarding one. And many of our students say this was the reason they signed up to the course, which is great because it comes at the end, which means they've stuck around all the way to the end to make sure they get that wonderful exposure to Kierkegaard's philosophy. And then throughout the year, you're seeing me at least once per term, where you will have a supervision with me one-to-one, and we'll talk about what interests you. And that will be looking at ways we can relate anything from Hellenistic philosophy to what you're interested in, or anything from Kantian philosophy to what you're interested in, or anything from existential or Kierkegaardian philosophy and relate that to what you're interested in. So that's the rough structure of the course. And it might become clear. If that's still not clear to people, we might get it a little bit clearer as we go through the questions as well. But Dan, did you want to add anything before we do turn to some of the questions that people have asked?
Well, of course, I can't yet comment on the last term.
Of course.
Yes, because I'm before that. However, I find indeed that this course is more demanding compared to the undergraduate. So I think a little preparation for anyone that embarks in such a course is, well, is beneficial. On the other hand, what I also want to add, and you have touched upon the subject, there is the matter of how much one needs to read. And in particular, when you describe the three different subjects, it can seem that the amount of material to be absorbed is enormous. Greek philosophy, ancient philosophy, it spills over into the Roman period, and then with Kant, and I have no doubts with Kierkegaard as well. But there is material on the VLE. It's only unlocked once the term starts. So that limits to a certain level the enthusiasm, which is good because one can focus on the current term and the current material. There's plenty of material there, and maybe the ones that have been already PACE students or have been students in other universities know that being a student and even distance learning and even through this kind of courses opens the door to accessing a whole world of materials. And then it is indeed a great adventure. And I thought I should add that at this point. Thank you.
No, Dan, that's really helpful. And actually, you've raised two, possibly even three very important points that I wanted to flag because they don't actually come up in the questions that we've been asked so far. But people, if you, anyone watching, please do feel free to submit new questions in the Q&A as well. So if we haven't covered something that you're interested in, please do submit your own questions using the Q&A function. But one thing that wasn't touched upon, which I normally get asked as a question, is how much preparation should I do in advance? And my answer to that is start the minute you apply. Because the thing is, it's not a huge amount. It's not a huge amount. I personally think it is very manageable in the time that you get given it. But at the same time, you don't know what's going to happen during the term. You don't know what hiccups and interruptions are going to occur. So if you think, oh, it's fine, I can give up a day during the weekend and I can give up an afternoon or two during the week, that should be fine. Yeah, sure, that's fine, unless something gets in the way. And yes, we flex around this. So we are continuing education. We're designed to flex around complex lives. So people who have jobs, people who have families, people who have other commitments, we try and flex around you. So if, for instance, a deadline is going to be problematic, you can get extensions, you can request for late penalties to be removed. You can even hit pause during your studies and return 12 months later back to the course, because that's the benefit of the course not having changed that much over the last 5 years of delivery, or no, a little bit more than that, actually. No, it's now 7 years, I think, something like that. The other thing I want to say, though, is in terms of that preparation is let it be guided by what you're interested in. Because like I said, the course will deliver a lot of information to you, but one thing we can't give you is those things that are going to excite you about philosophy. So if you're interested in the philosophy of mind, explore Plato's philosophy of mind, explore Kant's philosophy of mind, and explore existential nature, philosophy of mind, or existential themes within the philosophy of mind. For instance, Thomas Nagel's wonderful "What is it like to be a bat?" for instance, would introduce you to the question of subjectivity, a topic that Kierkegaard's very interested in. So engaging with more reading, more learning, doing short courses perhaps during the summer, which one person did mention in the questions as well, which we'll come back to. That can also be really helpful and effective. Sort of getting a bit involved in philosophy before you even perhaps do the interview or engage in the learning itself. So start early would be my advice. The other thing that Dan mentioned was the VLE is present and set up with materials. And it's just to note that, yes, there are readings and we expect you to engage in reading that's both on the list and off the list. But we also would like you to watch our recorded lectures before the teaching weekend, because a lot of that sets you up to engage in the learning on the day as well, or during the teaching weekends. And the other thing Dan alluded to as well was the access that you get through being a member of the University of Cambridge. Being a member of the University of Cambridge, one of the world's leading research universities, you get access to an awful lot of material. And it can actually be a bit sort of bamboozling. It can be a little bit, I don't know where to go in all of this. How do I know what I have access to? And my advice is to explore, it's to sort of take opportunities to learn from people, to join clubs, to join societies where you can, and learn from others, learn from your colleagues and your peers. And when you find out something interesting, share it with people. So creating a community of learning is really, really valuable. And I think that's one thing that we get from the postgraduate certificate that's so wonderful, is that community of learning, because students are coming together in person for those teaching weekends. Online is fantastic, and I do genuinely think online learning is a tremendous and fantastic way to learn, and we've developed fantastic techniques for developing online learning. But the in-person is something special, especially when you're doing it in such a beautiful place as Madingley Hall. Okay, so on that note, so I can see questions appearing in the Q&A, which is
Indeed,
fantastic.
yes.
But I'm going to quickly work through some of the questions that we've had already, if that's okay, Dan. And
Sure.
I'll deliver some answers. Some of these are very quick answers. Some of them are more involved. Some of them will absolutely need to be illuminated by Dan, who will have much better insight from the other side of the fence from me. So one of the very first questions that was asked is, will the course still be open on April 26th? And I think what that means is, will it still be open for applications? And the answer is yes. So the course is open for applications until the 28th of May. We probably won't allow applications beyond that date. It's quite tricky because we have to schedule interviews. And that brings me to a question, which no one has asked specifically, but I often get, which is, what are the interviews like? The interviews are relatively informal. Really, they're not tests of your philosophical acumen. I'm not there to find out, do you know Plato's real name? Because you can Google that and you can find out instantly. That's not what we're interested in. What we're interested in is, are you motivated? Are you engaged? And do you know what you're signing up for? And again, here I will turn to Dan. Dan, was that your experience of our interview process?
Well, I have to be honest about it and to say, and maybe I should have mentioned that in the beginning, since I see there's a question in the Q&As. I am an overseas student. It's not that I come from very far away, but for me, in the beginning, it was a bit a fear that I wouldn't be able to attend in person. And so I started with the undergraduate courses where everything was done online. Now, when it came to this postgraduate course, indeed, it was a continuation of previous courses. So then the interview was, to a certain extent, similar. But I also had the advantage of already having had the experience of PACE staff being supportive and helpful. So for me, I was basically expecting more or the same. It was just, if you want, the fear of being convincing enough to get into a postgraduate course, exactly as you mentioned, Dr. Carter, not coming from the philosophy area, not having a fully or a proper philosophical training. But then what I can advise, because it has worked for me, if one comes with their passion, and that passion is visible, and then one can also transmit an honest message, I think that is enough. For the rest, one builds up as one goes. I'm not sure whether that is useful as an addition or an answer, but that's what I can say. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, so that's what we're aiming for. And again, it was nice of you to say that you felt supported by PACE staff, Dan, because we're also very keen to do that. So students who, for instance, don't get an offer, or applicants, I should say, who don't get an offer for the course, are typically not told, we didn't want you. They're told, we think you might benefit from doing one of the undergraduate courses first, and then applying again the subsequent year. And the good news about that is that the timing of our interviews is such that if you were to find out that you were unsuccessful, you would know that you could apply for the undergraduate courses still in that year, because our undergraduate courses are open for applications well into September even, I think, or certainly through August. So Those who are unsuccessful, and we've had a number of students who perhaps, again, could have done well on the postgraduate certificate, but were advised or felt that they would be better placed doing the undergraduate certificate first, and then did that and then came on to the postgraduate certificate the next year. The One of the questions in the Q&A was asking a very similar question about, will the deadline for application close out earlier than 28th of May? No, we do a closed field. So what we will do is, if people apply early, we will confirm which of those people will get an interview. But we stay open till the 28th of May. We do not close once we've got enough students. And we don't know how many students we've got, because all the interviews will be held after the 28th of May. It's just that some students might find out they've already got an interview before the 28th of May. That's all. So we do it as a closed field. We do not close early, but we probably won't stay open late either, because the course is quite popular. We typically do find that we get a full cohort of around about 25 to 30 students on the course, because that probably answers another question that people might want answered: how many people are joining the course? Excellent. There was one question which I think is very easy and quick to answer, which was around concessions for University of Cambridge staff. Now, I'm no expert on this, but I know that there is a concession, so that whoever asked that question probably is aware of this too. I've put a link in the chat for those who have a role at the University of Cambridge, and that's the one that would help you to identify whether you're eligible for that 25% discount for Cambridge staff for fees. One other question that came in, which again, I can't necessarily provide detailed information on myself, but which I'm hoping will be answered by the university's website on this, is around immigration and visa status. So typically we have international students sign up, and we don't seem to have anyone who gets denied a visa. We have to do visa checks as part of the weekend residential courses. So when students arrive, we check passports, etc. So we're held to the government's rules around visa restrictions, etc. But we haven't yet had a student unable to secure one, unless it was already kind of fairly obvious that they might not get a visa, for instance, because they're from a country that perhaps is experiencing war or conflict, etc., and that might make getting a visa difficult. So it wasn't necessarily something related to study. It was something related to their own specific nationality. But advice is available, and the Central University has an email. So I've put a link into the chat again, where if you visit that, there is a helpline where you can drop them an email and ask them a question. And they're very knowledgeable about such things, far more knowledgeable than me. So they would be good people to ask on this. Okay. There was a question that we had that was, I earned a Bachelor of Arts in 2018 and work full-time in children's social services. Can a PG cert lead to a master's while working? How manageable is the workload? So here I am going to turn to Dan briefly, but I will first say a couple of things, which is something I've already said, which is that we're continuing education. We're designed for students who work full-time. We also even have students who are doing study elsewhere, but also doing study alongside their other study. So they might be based at Edinburgh University and doing a degree there, but also come to us to study. And I'm generally supportive of this, but I would note a couple of things. When it comes to having signed up to 2 different courses, if your deadlines are difficult to meet, my advice would be, don't try and use that as an excuse to get an extension, because the only grounds for an extension are generally unexpected things happening. And you can't allege that you're signing up for one course and then signing up for another one was unexpected. So it becomes problematic with that. So all I would say is be very clear with where your deadlines are, and make sure that you think it's manageable. I would probably recommend that people not do a full-time study alongside this part-time study. I think that would be unwise. But working, absolutely. Almost all of our students are working students. They have jobs, they have families as well. And I also want to just say, I did work for the social services. I worked for the children and families team in Cheltenham in the West Country. And I know how valuable the study of philosophy can be to questions of social science and social care, etc. So I would be very eager to see someone come to the course who has a background there as well. But Dan, did you want to say something about workload?
Well, workload combined with a day job, as it were.
Mm,
And yes, well, I was sort of triggered to start mature learning at the university again in the period of the pandemics, because everything changed, and out of a sudden, there were many more opportunities for studying from a distance. And I continued, right? I continued also after the pandemics. To this course specifically, it can definitely be done while having a full-time day job, but it requires, well, like many other things in life, it requires a certain discipline. One element of this discipline, you have already mentioned, Dr. Carter, that was, if I remember correctly, once you know what you have to do, whether it is an assignment or reading material or
mm,
even following some recordings, one should start and do it. Slice the elephant, as it were. And then it can work. The situation with two essays, one after the other, is, I find, the most difficult. First of all, not because they come sort of together, but they also overlap with sometimes holidays, like the end of the year holiday. Essays are maybe have a deadline exactly after the Christmas break, or
mm.
maybe immediately after the Easter break, as it was the case. And I can just share my own experience. The second essay of the second term was due yesterday. And there was an Easter break before that. And although I tried to be, as I say, disciplined, right, I still managed to upload the wrong version of the essay yesterday. So there it goes. One should start early, one should have a schedule, and then one does one's best. But it definitely can be done together with a day job. Absolutely.
Thank you, Dan. Um, One of the reasons, by the way, that I mentioned that it's so nice to have people who do have professions where they've been working, etc., because one of the last parts of this question, which I've overlooked so far, is around funding. So funding for people who are working, etc. And my answer to so if you haven't had any higher education previously, firstly, you probably won't be applying for the postgraduate certificate, which means you're probably therefore not eligible for a student loan, which is unfortunate. But one thing I will say is not enough people think imaginatively about who they can ask. So, for instance, I had one student who did one of our undergraduate research courses. She was researching the ethics of water sustainability, and she worked for a water company. And I said, "Are they paying for you to do this research?" She said, "I hadn't thought to ask." So she did, and they did. So my advice is don't discount the possibility of just asking your employer. Like I said, the Children and Families team would be benefited by you doing this study. Would they pay for the entire fees? Probably not. I know that budgets are tight, but they might well offer some sort of training support. I know that many companies often don't use their training budget, for instance, and are actually often delighted to be able to be given an opportunity to spend some of their training budget. So do at least consider asking your employer. That goes for everyone, by the way. It's a worthwhile thing. And philosophy does genuinely have impact on critical thinking, on problem solving, on problem identification, on conflict resolution, and all sorts of other things, data analytics, and all these kinds of things. My wife, who was doing a data analysis course, was shocked that I understood coding left-handed and right-handed. And I said, "Oh, it's just logic." She said, "Well, really? When did you learn this?" "In logic class." So I was able to apply that logical understanding to that particular problem because I'd had training in it. Again, was I an expert? No, I'm not. And she can run rings around me now. But the point is that the training that we give you is genuinely relevant to your work. And if it's not, I want to know why not, because that's the goal. One person has asked, I think they're saying that they have a little bit of philosophical background. They've been listening to In Our Time. They've been reading perhaps and engaging with the work of Philippa Foot. and they were wondering if they should do some short courses. And my answer to that is you don't have to, but it's not a terrible idea. Like I said before, the minute you get your application in, assume that you're going to get an offer and go and do a few courses. Go and do some free courses if money's tight, and or possibly just read and engage with podcasts. I can recommend a wonderful podcast, quite an old one. It actually predates the term podcast, but it's the series 5-episode series called Enlightened by Love. It's about the philosopher Simone Weil, and it was produced by David Cayley. And if you Google David Cayley and Simone Weil or Enlightened by Love and podcast, you will find the 5-episode series on David Cayley's website. And so there's one tip for you, but there are plenty of other resources that you can dip into. I quite like the very short introduction books that are produced by Oxford University Press. They're fantastically good at introducing you to things like existentialism or the Kantian notions of the synthetic a priori, just to give you a little bit of vocabulary, just so you know that when someone says the word ontology or epistemology, you know what they mean. Now, ideally, people would know what that meant before they came on a postgraduate philosophy course, but actually, often it is just a bit of vocabulary. And once you know it, you know it. And if you've got the general skills of being able to construct an argument and think critically, those are far more important and far harder to learn quickly. So don't worry about not knowing the meanings of certain words. Think more, do I think along philosophical lines? Do I try and find out, what's the underlying question behind this? Where's the real problem here? That kind of thing. Okay. We have another PACE student here, Dan. Perhaps we know them. I don't know. I don't have a name, but we have someone who's done a level 4 qualification in philosophy and is doing the level 5 qualification. I know this is a PACE student because they're doing the course in creativity theory, which I helped to develop. And they've asked if they could make it onto this course. The answer is flatly yes. We have a number of students who go from level 4 to level 7. Typically, what they're getting in grades is something around about 70, but there have been some who have been getting mid to high 60s as well, who would go straight into the postgraduate course, especially if they have a degree and they've done the undergraduate certificate just to show that they can also do philosophy. If you've done level 4, level 5, I would ideally like to see someone go on to do the advanced diploma, but is it essential? No, it's not. What you could do is apply for both. The advanced diploma you can apply for, and in that course you get to research anything you want. So if there's a topic in creativity theory, or if there's a topic in the undergraduate certificate that particularly took your interest, you could investigate that for an entire year. And if you did one of those advanced diploma courses, you then have level 6, which means going to level 7 is so much easier. But the other thing I would say is, if you don't have a specific topic that you're particularly interested in and wouldn't want to research, then don't think about doing the advanced diploma. The primary thing here is, what do you want to get from the learning, not what will we allow you to do. We're here to try and enable you to get on in what you want to do. So I would very much like to think we would be open-minded and consider it. But if you did apply for both, it means that if you didn't get an offer for the postgraduate course, you might well get an offer for the advanced diploma. In fact, I can pretty much guarantee if you've done level 5, you're going to be allowed to go on to level 6. We also had a question here about there was a question about I would like to know if my current qualifications and interests made me eligible for this course. So because I don't know what those were, what I'm going to say is I'm going to bunch it up with the next question as well, which was the question about my degree in computer science. And I believe I can answer all of this collectively and just say, if you have a degree at all, it is almost certainly going to have touched upon themes that we will touch upon in this course. Why do I say that? Because somewhat arrogantly, I'm going to say that philosophy is the subject that sits above, or at least adjacent to, all other subjects. There is philosophy of law, there is philosophy of computer science, there is philosophy of mind, there's philosophy of sport, there's philosophy of humor, there's philosophy of psychology, philosophy of science, and so on. So whatever your degree, if you are leaning towards the philosophical, I'm already interested. And we have students who have done finance, who've done physics, who've done genetics, who've done art history, who've done English literature, who have then gone on to do fantastically well in the postgraduate certificate. So I would say do not rule it out. But what I would say is, definitely investigate philosophy a little bit more deeply. So do some short courses, engage in some free courses online, read a little bit, do all that kind of stuff. The wider reading to make sure that this is definitely something you want to sign up for. But if you think it is, then I'm very likely to agree with you. And the next question was do you accept business graduates? And the answer to that is also yes. And we have many business students who take the course. Um, Question here was could one go directly from the postgraduate philosophy course to a PhD? We have had students do this. So one student went from our postgraduate certificate to a Harvard divinity or theology PhD. She did fantastically well, and really enjoyed it. We had another student who did divinity here in Cambridge. They were doing the advanced diploma at the Faculty of Divinity, as well as the postgraduate certificate in philosophy. They then negotiated with the divinity faculty to say, would you allow me to do this course instead of your advanced diploma? The advanced diploma that they offer gives you automatic entry into their PhD. So you might want to have a look at that, by the way, because that might be a better option for you if that's what you're thinking of doing. But they were able to negotiate, and they agreed that the postgraduate certificate would count as a qualification that would enable them to go into the PhD, and they did go on to the PhD. We've had a number of students do MPhils as well as master's courses elsewhere. Some have gone on to gone to Essex, where I did my PhD, which I was delighted about. Some have gone on to MPhils here in Cambridge or in Oxford. So yes, the answer is simply yes. You can use this as a transitional qualification. So if you have a degree and you want to prove, because this is proof, that you can study master's level philosophy at a top flight university, you can do philosophy at Cambridge at postgraduate level, at master's level. You can prove that because if you pass this course, you've done that. You've proven it already. So can I do a master's isn't the question anymore. The question is this the right master's for you to undertake? So my view would be yes, this would be an excellent way to think about going on to further postgraduate study. Dan, any thoughts on that? Any views on any of the other questions that I've answered so far?
I will just add a little bit on a corollary of something that you have just presented,
Mm,
because I sense some interested people would want to know what is the difference or the expectation in level between an undergraduate or between the undergraduate various courses linked to philosophy, right? There are two level 4 courses and two level 6 courses, and they alternate, although there is also a logic of continuity between them. But what I wanted to say is something different, my experience. So what I have experienced moving from an undergraduate, in this case, an undergraduate level 6, to this postgraduate, was not necessarily an expectation of a mastery of philosophical vocabulary. It was the requirement of engaging with the subject matter in a higher level criticality. In other words, what I thought, what I understood was expected from me was not to describe or to comment on text, even if it was an imposed subject, right? Dr. Carter explained that there is one essay that has an imposed subject. You choose from a short list, and then you have one that you can model to your interests. What I understood was required from me was to come with a critical approach, to ask a question that I would then answer in the essay and not just describe what I read and understood, for example, with respect to that specific piece of Kant's, that late essay in his life. So this is what it's expected, to have a critical approach to construct, maybe if you want, something new. It's more challenging and it's more difficult, but this is the level of the postgraduate that I maybe
Ooh.
to comment on that, Dr. Carter.
Yes, thanks, Dan. We lost you for a second there, but don't worry. We were absolutely getting the gist of what you were saying, and I can say that I agree with what you were saying. So the idea is that yes, there is an element of scholarship in postgraduate work, which is why we have that first assignment being the longer one, which is much more about, have we understood the ideas? And then there's a shorter kind of execution of applying those ideas. And application of ideas to a problem that you're personally interested in inevitably involves taking risks, moving things into new spaces, trying new things out. Is it necessarily entirely novel? No, but that's not a requirement. But the idea is that you'll be making connections and using the philosophy actively to do something. So yes, absolutely. I would also note that there are other important differences between. So some people apply for the postgraduate certificate because they think it's more serious. What I want to be really clear about is that's absolutely not the case. The undergraduate certificate is incredibly serious, sometimes too serious. When I first arrived at the University of Cambridge and I saw the course being taught, the very first thing that students had to read was On the Unreality of Time by John McTaggart, written in 1914, a very difficult text. And I said, no, 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 that can't be the first thing that students introduced to philosophy get to read. So we switched metaphysics for ethics. So when you came for the first time, you were actually reading ethical texts, which you're more likely to have a view on. But the point is, you still read The Unreality of Time by McTaggart. You still have to engage with that more difficult material. And in fact, in a way, you deal with more of it because you've got to cover three very large different topics, all of ethics, all of philosophy of mind, all of political philosophy. We cover a lot in those undergraduate courses, but the assessment level is lower. And the expectation of you, as Dan was saying, to delve into new thinking and challenge ideas is not as high. So my advice would be if you're new to philosophy and you just are interested in philosophy, I think the undergraduate certificate is fantastic because if you set your bar up here, so the bar to pass is 40%. But if you set your own bar at 70% and say, I'm going to try and get a first for every paper in the undergraduate certificate, you'll find that it's just as challenging as doing the postgraduate certificate, but perhaps different in format and different in the number of topics that you cover. So it's worth thinking about the full suite that are available. But if you are genuinely thinking about, I want to do serious philosophy on tailored topics that kind of have applied practical focus, then I think the postgraduate certificate is a good one. And certainly if you were looking for in-person, cohort-driven, dialogue-driven discussions around philosophy, then I think the postgraduate certificate is also a very good choice. But what I just wanted to say is don't think that just because one is undergraduate and one is postgraduate, that they're somehow not dealing with philosophy in serious ways. We are dealing with philosophy seriously throughout our higher education. But what we're doing is we're not assessing you quite to the same standard. So when you do the undergraduate certificate, you can raise your own bar. With the postgraduate certificate, we've already raised it. That's the key difference. Okay. So we had one question. So let me answer this one because I think this is a really important technical question or logistical question. International students interested in what are the attendance requirements, and this comes up a lot because it's implications for visas, it's cost implications for flights and for travel. And I want to be clear with everyone: we have purposely designed this to be very low impact. So someone said, "What is the attendance requirement beyond the 3 weekends?" None. There is none. You come for the 3 weekends. Some people ask in the interview even, do I have to come for all 3? My answer to that is ideally, yes, please. We strongly encourage you to attend because you will regret it if you don't, because that is such a valuable opportunity to engage with your peers and with the tutors, to ask questions and hear feedback, but they are recorded. So if you can't attend one of the weekends because something gets in the way, that's not the end of the world. We record it and you can engage with it and you can ask me questions. We can have a quick meeting and we can talk it through. That's not the problem. But we would strongly encourage people to attend for those 3 weekends. And if you were thinking, the minimum as opposed to the maximum, then change your thinking because no, that is the maximum. Actually, it's not even the maximum. You can come to Cambridge whenever you would like, and we would encourage you to come as often as you would like. You would have a university card, you'll have a university email address and Raven ID, which means you can make use of university resources. So we would encourage you to come to Cambridge as often as you can, But the only times we're going to require you to come is for those teaching weekends. And again, even if something interrupted one of those, I think that would be fine. If you knew you couldn't make two of the weekends, then I would strongly encourage you to apply for a different course. If you can make it to at least two, and you know you can, but one of them might be tricky, then still apply, because that third one, okay, fine, we can make allowances, but ideally we would like you to be present for all three teaching weekends. And then there were a couple of questions which I'm going to deal with relatively quickly, if I may, because I don't want to get dragged into philosophical debates, but they were related to philosophical topics, but in interesting ways that do relate to the course. So one person asked what critical thinking meant, and this was almost certainly from course description. I've certainly listed it as a skill that you will develop, and I think I've even mentioned it on this AMA. So what do I mean by critical thinking? Well, I think I mean by critical thinking, what most people would mean by critical thinking, which is thinking about something from multiple angles. Right? So coming at it from different perspectives. That's what we tend to mean by critical thinking. In terms of critical thinking, though, as in the act of thinking, it's a verb. We have to do it. It is identifying a problem. It's breaking that problem down. It's determining if it's really a problem. And I keep saying problem because that's what really motivates my interest. So my mantra is get students to feel the pain of the problem, which often is painful in philosophy when you realize, oh, I thought I knew things, but now I don't think I know anything. And I kind of smile because that was my goal, is to arrive at this state of open-mindedness, right? So we come in with this sense of certainty. Oh, I know I'm right about all these things. And then suddenly a question gets asked that shatters that and breaks you open into lots of different ways. Like a prism, it sort of offers you these alternatives. Unfortunately, philosophy then does this, which is close your mind again, but ideally back onto something that is more correct, or more accurately what you would have believed if you'd thought it through to its depths. But sometimes it's just nice to do this, just to fracture that purity of our thought into lots of different avenues and ways of thinking. On this, I must turn to Dan because Dan's experienced this firsthand. So, Dan, how has your experience of the pain of the problem been?
Well, exactly. I thought that I was able to divulge a bit in my previous answer that this is what is expected. And indeed, it is mind-opening. I would also want to use this opportunity to expand a bit on the answer of presence, because I had decisions to make myself coming from abroad, not necessarily visa issues, since it is from the European Union, and then there is a relatively easy arrangement. But what I said to myself is, let's give it a try and make the proper arrangements for the first weekend and see what that brings to me. And just by attending the first weekend, first of all, I understood that if something happens, then one might need to skip the second day, because to one of my colleagues in the cohort, this happened. And life is unexpected, things like that happen. But it also convinced me of the utility and, in fact, of the richness that I get by interacting after a long, long time of doing the courses only on screen with real people in a real environment. I wouldn't say it is easy, because indeed it is costly. And someone asked, and this gives me the possibility to answer as well. The first weekend that I attended in the first term, I took a hotel in Cambridge itself. But then, of course, the course was at Madingley Hall. And then for the second one, I stayed in Madingley Hall. And it made a further difference. Not to mention, besides the lovely surroundings, also, it was cheaper than staying in Cambridge itself. So, of course, these places, Oxford, Cambridge, they can be quite expensive, but Madingley Hall is not only a good venue for the course, it also offers, and we have, or the students have rooms sort of secured. They just need to ask for them. Now, to come back to the level of challenging, criticality, and so on. For this, I needed to pay a lot of attention to the cues given during the course because it is live, and then we are expected by the end of the second day to sort of settle upon one of the compulsory questions. But being live, being there in person and having physical interaction, one can also discuss with the colleagues in the cohort about those questions, but one can also ask questions to the specific tutor. The two people that Dr. Carter has mentioned are very approachable, or at least I experienced them as very approachable. And then one can ask them directly, this subject, what would it mean? And those cues help navigate the level of criticality. It is indeed expected, and I have experienced this myself through the marks and the comments that came back, because we get not only marks, we get comments, and then one can also be briefed to a certain extent. So
if I can jump in there, Dan.
Go ahead.
So one of the things that our examiners consistently say is the feedback that students get at PACE is incredibly detailed and incredibly personalized and incredibly relevant to what they're writing about, what they're interested in. So I'm glad that, Dan, you mentioned that, because it's definitely worth mentioning, because we do put a lot of effort in. I'm marking essays and I put a lot of effort into making sure that it's tailored feedback, not always necessarily related to the grade, but just related to, oh, have you thought about this? But yes, thank you for bringing that up.
No, that's I can stop here.
Okay, well, thanks, Dan. Yeah, because I am conscious of time. We don't have much longer left, and we have lots of questions, which is fantastic. So I'm gonna bunch the last two pre-questions that we had together. One was related to an interest in environmentalism. I would say to that, there are numerous students who have applied Hellenistic thinking, Stoicism, for instance, and its focus on living in a natural life, to questions of environmentalism. Some people have applied Kantian thought to this through the nature of, like, is it rational to risk the environment? The wonderful work of Honora O'Neill, for instance, who has spent much time in Cambridge and often comes here to speak, has written on this question of the environment from a Kantian perspective. And then, of course, existentialism, the existential risk that we're facing, we can engage with in that way. Different use of the word existential, of course, but still focused on this question of, do we feel a sense of urgency because we're going to die in our own lives, and do we feel a sense of urgency about the end of the world in quite the same way? Again, dark and difficult material, but that's what philosophy tends to engage with. So philosophy also doesn't shy away from difficult questions. That's another way in which it benefits us, which is what the question was alluding to. One other question was related to the final question was related to an interest that the questioner had in theology. And I just want to say, so obviously, we have Kierkegaard, who is a Christian, although he says this wonderful cryptic phrase, God does not exist, he is eternal. So he has a very interesting theology. I am a philosopher of religion by background. I'm very interested in Wittgenstein's philosophy of religion, but I'm also very taken with the theology of Simone Weil. And I would welcome, and many students, again, have written on topics related to theology. Some people even looking at AI. Is it a way of breaching the barrier between us and a divine understanding of the world? Again, very interesting questions that students can engage with. So if you're interested in those topics, bring those interests with you, and absolutely you will be able to explore them on the course. Excellent. Oh, and related to that, very interesting question we've had around a strong interest in phenomenology. So Merleau-Ponty, Heidegger, and Nancy. And can this be addressed within the construct of the program? Answer, yes, it absolutely can. So I've been writing recently myself about Maurice Merleau-Ponty's focus on the genius for ambiguity, which he says can define human beings, because I think it's a wonderful way into the question of what is creativity and where does it come from and why is it linked perhaps to our biological natures. But phenomenology comes up a lot. Lots of students have been looking at this through the lens of Kant, who wasn't a phenomenologist, but certainly sort of this idea of the synthetic a priori, the idea that we experience the world in a certain way, introduces this question. And I'd be very happy with a student who proposed a paper on phenomenology. Likewise, phenomena, of course, is a Greek word, and it's coming from notions that are related to ancient Greek philosophy. So there are ways into it through that as well. So, answer yes, that is absolutely something you could engage with. Um, so, the question is, I'm currently very far away overseas. I can see that the in-person teaching weekends are a very important part of the course. I know these weekends aren't optional, but would this be possible to complete if one of these weekends were missed? Perfect. You've preempted an answer I gave earlier, which is if you're going to miss one, we can work around that. If you knew you couldn't make two, then I wouldn't. I would recommend perhaps looking at a fully online course or perhaps a course a bit closer to home. But otherwise, if you're only missing one, I don't think that's the end of the world. And we can certainly look at how we could accommodate that and how we could support you prior to that one weekend being missed. So perhaps making sure you do all the preparation for it and then watch it. You can even attend online. We do have students who occasionally drop in online. We even had one student who had to do that during one weekend because they were ill. So they were on site, they were at Madingley Hall, but they were unwell and they didn't want to spread their illness. So they stayed in their room and attended bits of the class from their room. So it again, we have the wonders of technology. We can make use of these. So it is always possible, yes. I have a question here from, I've got to answer this question because it's from someone called Searle, and obviously it's a very philosophical name, so I feel like we should. I've done a foundation degree in psychology at Regents and a full undergrad in media, culture and identity at Roehampton. Over the past few years, have a newfound love for philosophy. I think this course would be incredible at tying it all together. Could I take the points from this course and complete a shorter master's at Cambridge or alternative provision, or would it need to be a full master's? Um, I think the question there is related to can you carry over credit from this course to another master's? We have had a student do this. They did it to the Open University. So the Open University, and again, this is entirely dependent on the institution that is receiving the credit, but we do award CATS credits. So this student looked into, I don't think they ended up taking up the offer, but they spoke to the university, the Open University, and they were willing to accept the 60 credits that they've been awarded for this course at master's level to carry over into the master's at the Open University, so they could cut down the amount of time they had to engage. One of our examiners actually is from the Open University, and I think based on that, it would be it's a good idea that people think about doing this. Frustratingly, Cambridge does not accept CATS credits. So if you wanted to do an MPhil, you would have to start the full MPhil and do it from start to finish. There is not That's not necessarily a bad thing necessarily. Obviously, it has impacts financially and in terms of time, but this is philosophy and it's good to do things properly. But what I would say is don't rule out all the available options when it comes to masters at Cambridge. There is the masters in philosophy, the MPhil at the Faculty of Philosophy, but there is also history and philosophy of science. We had a couple of students go on to do history and philosophy of science MPhils. We've had a number of students go to divinity. Students can go to intellectual history that's run by the Faculty of History. Some people have gone on to do law. Some people have gone on to do classics. And some people even have applied to things like computer science and so on. So philosophy has so many different applications. Oh, education was another one as well. So it may well be possible to transfer credits to another university. That would be their decision, not ours. But I don't know if it's a. I know it's. I hate saying this because it's your decision ultimately, but I think it's quite a nice thing that you would do this course as a conversion and then go on to do a full master's anyway, because I promise you, you wouldn't simply be learning the same things. It's not a technical subject in that respect. Philosophy is a very technical subject, but not necessarily in that respect. It's technical in the sense that the words we use with great precision. So if you use a particular word, you have to keep using that same word and so on. One question we had, do similar backgrounds like social science benefit the application, or I think the question is, are you more likely to get accepted if you're from a subject with close connections to philosophy? Like I said, there aren't many that don't. We've had people who have a background in music, mathematics, physics, as I say, education. So I don't think it makes it more likely. I think it's helpful, certainly. It would probably remove a concern if we felt that there was a concern that perhaps you haven't got an experience in philosophy. We might feel it's better that you've done something like psychology or history or intellectual history or even theology, uh, those kinds of subjects. But usually what we find is we kind of want students to come with their own disciplinary perspectives that they can then sort of take philosophy and sort of force it to apply to their own interests. I've got a student at the moment who has a background in business who is writing about uh, P.F. Strawson's paper on free will, which I actually wrote about for my PhD, but he's applying it in a way that I never dreamt of applying it to apply to organizational disagreements and conflict resolution. Fantastic, fantastic stuff. So I would rather people kind of were able to see a connection between their subject and philosophy, but I don't think I have to be assuming that there is a connection, if that makes sense. Uh, So I think this is a really interesting question. So again, just having scanned it, but let's see. So I'm considering applying to this program to strengthen my academic profile, given that my previous results, philosophy were a 2-2 and an LLM pass. So that was a master's in law, that was a pass, are not sufficiently competitive. So it's pretty competitive. I believe someone got a 2-2 once and became king, but whatever. But so don't rule yourself out is my point. But I take your point. It'd be nice to get some extra qualifications there. My aim is to apply for a PhD at Cambridge, and I see this as a possible way to demonstrate my current academic ability. I agree. You're often judged by your last result. And if you're thinking of applying and you wanted a reference, it's very good to get it from the last person who worked with you. And being a supervisor for every student on this course, I often do experience, get a good first-hand experience of what people are capable of. So I would say yes, that could well help you with that application. Is it going to guarantee you a PhD place at Cambridge, which is your ultimate goal? No one can offer you that. No one can give you that reassurance. But what I can tell you is it will make it more likely and hopefully enable you to do that. And I will work with you to try and make that possible, make that happen. Um, Dan, I realized we've run over time. So is there anything you wanted to add at the close?
No, not really. I think you have covered, or we have covered, quite some territory. And I remember you telling me before this started, when we checked for sound and image and so on, that questions that stay or remain unanswered in the Q&A might be answered somehow after this live session. So maybe it would be a good moment to explain the technicalities of that.
The marketing team are well ahead of us, Dan. So they've already posted in the chat the email address that you can send any inquiries to. And if there's any inquiries that they can't answer, they send them on to me and I will answer them. So please do send us any questions. If we haven't answered any questions that are critical to your application, please do send those on. Thank you, Dan, for noting that. That's great. And yeah, thank you everyone for attending. And thank you, Dan, for joining me today. It's been great.
My pleasure.
Wonderful.